aging. And he is kind of our local expert in all these areas. And so we're just like really excited to partner with them and to have him here to help all of us understand all these difficult to understand topics. So
Thank you.
thanks, Matt.
How's the resolution if people want the lights turned on? Is it okay? Okay. So on that right table there, we have the copies of what you'll be seeing on screen for you to take home. So if it's easier for you to follow along on the document, you can certainly do that. And then we're also going to be touching on some of the other things that we have added out back there. This legal financial planning for people living with dementia. The healthcare directive or living will packet, which also includes the actual legal document. The 5 wishes booklet, which is kind of an expanded view of the documents we'll talk about. It takes into account a lot of other personal concerns, desires about end of life planning for the person in question. And then the durable power of attorney document summary and explanation and the actual legal document here. So we'll talk about where these documents come from, especially the durable power of attorney, the living will. There's a great website we use, WashingtonLawHealth.org, for that. So just want to make sure you guys are aware of that. And as Melissa stated, my name is Matt Santelli. I'm from the Pierce County Aging and Disabilities Resource Center. I'm the lead education and outreach specialist there. So we've been doing these series of talks out here in East Pierce County on caring for aging parents. And now we're moving into some of the more specifics. And today will be the one about keeping it legal in terms of documents you need for long-term care planning. We're also your area agency on aging, meaning we provide a lot of information and services for seniors and disabled. The goal of our office is to always think about how we can keep people aging in place in terms of keeping them healthy, safe, financially stable in their homes as long as possible with whatever surrounding support services we can provide. We have A to Z resource list on our website. You can email us, you can call us if you have any questions. We also have a public meeting and events calendar. I'm going to highlight a few of the events upcoming as well. So feel free to use this as a resource. All the services we provide, if you call us, consultation, if we do a home visit, it's free of charge. If we mail you out something. Plus, I do all kinds of other topical presentations on issues important to seniors and disabled folks, free of charge, 7 days a week if you give me enough notice. So if you have a small group, faith community group, a civic group, you want to hear about things like this, you want to hear about Medicare, if you want to hear about safe travel for seniors and disabled folks, if you want to hear about preventing and recovering from scams and fraud and identity theft for seniors and disabled, happy to come out and give those talks. I've got a relationship going with the Sans Souci Mobile Park there on South Hill, and I've been going out there periodically and giving talks to their community group. So if you're involved in anything like that, I'm happy to come out and talk to you about that. A couple of other things we're always highlighting that we bring routinely to events like this is the file of life. This is an actual document that you complete in the white pages there about your medical situation, emergency contacts, allergies, illnesses, injuries, and you fill it out and just put it back into the red pouch. And that means it's an first responders like East Pierce Fire and Rescue. So very important. Other things we're always promoting, part of my job is always promoting programs. Those of you who are in the workaday world, earned income, the payroll deduction for the Walk Heroes Fund started July 1. So when you get your next paycheck, you're going to see a new line item deduction for funding this program. This is a program that 3 years down the road, the benefit starts. It's going to be a total of $36,500 for long-term care in the home, medical equipment, the care facility. So please read through this. If you have any questions, call us or call them, ask about that. But the benefit right now is not going to actually be implemented for 3 years. So even when the payroll deduction started July 1 this year, the benefit as soon as it can start is July 1, 2026. And although it says a long-term care fund for everyone, it's actually for only people that have earned income in the workforce for a certain period of years. So it's a little misleading. Some of the ads you might see about it are a little misleading because it's not a fund for people that are needing help tomorrow. So if you have questions about it, please give us a call or give them a call for some research on that. We've also always promoting our Medicare savings programs. For those of you who are on Medicare, the Part B has a monthly premium of $168 a month. It goes
a year. There's actually programs, if you're on limited income, to pay that Part B premium for you, put it back in your check, and then that's extra money in your pocket. So if you have a senior that you know, family member, friend that might be limited income, doesn't matter how many assets they have. That's a brand new thing. They usually have an asset limit. This year it does not. So you can have $300,000 in the bank, you can own a rental home. As long as your income meets the guidelines on here for single and married, we can get you on that program. We administer that program if you call us. So please give us a call on that one, very important. We're also always promoting caregiver help and support. We have a family caregiver support program if you're taking care of a spouse, or if you're an adult child taking care of a parent taking care of a disabled adult child. We have a program to help support you. We also promote this program called True Alta, where they actually have free caregiver videos. You can get go ahead and log into their system. Once you're joined up, it's free. There's no obligations. It is approved through our county services. You can get all kinds of videos that you can watch online about caregiving. Some are 3 minutes long, some are 10 minutes long. Good practical tips on caregiving. So that's a good one to know about. We're also always promoting fall prevention. Our fall prevention brochure is there. And close by in September, we're going to have our Fall Prevention Awareness Day event, Friday, September 22nd, 11 to 1, Gordon Family YMCA in Sumner. You do not have to be a YMCA member to attend. You can just come in, show your ID, sign a waiver, and we're going to have all kinds of giveaways, demonstrations, raffle prizes, vendor tables. So we hope you can come out for that one. Also, in Sumner, next week, for those of you 60 and over who are Pierce County residents, we're having a walk-in COVID vaccine booster clinic at Sumner United Methodist Church, noon to 3. I'll be there at the table with all that information out. And if you're 60 and over, and you're a Pierce County resident, and if you're eligible to get your booster, you're going to walk away with a $75 gas purchasing card. You can use at all major gas stations to purchase some gas, $75. You can probably fill up your tank with that. So we'd be happy to see you there next Thursday. No appointment needed, just walk in, easy peasy. If you had this current booster that's out, that came out last October, 4 months removed from that shot, you can get a second booster if you're 65 and over or immunocompromised. So we'd be happy to see you there for that clinic next week. Please spread the word on this. We might get a big crowd. The biggest crowd we've had at Sumner, that was 14 people that were eligible to get the card. So we're happy to have you come in for that. Also, we're going to talk about dementia a bit today. We're going to talk about legal planning. There is a dementia legal planning project that will set up the documents we're going to talk about free of charge for you. Okay, so make sure you grab this. This is funded through the state Aging and Long-Term Support Administration. So this is a legit deal. They'll actually set you up with a local attorney that's on their panel to provide this service. So make sure you grab this one on the way out, because you don't necessarily need to have an attorney to set up the documents we'll talk about, but it certainly can help if you have questions and things like that. Also, if you have seniors in the family, 60 and over, we still have senior farmers market vouchers available. This is an $80 debit card that a senior can get to use at the local markets over the course of this summer into October. There is income eligibility, again, no asset eligibility. So please spread the word on that. It's all done through the mail, online, or over the phone. That one's there. And finally, along with senior nutrition, we're promoting all of the food pantries around the county. So if you know someone that's in distress, struggling with the high cost of living, please have them look at this list. The print is very small, but it's not. Food pantries available for you. So we would love to have people get out and use these food pantries. They're getting a lot of donations right now. I've heard some of these food pantries provide you a box, 70-pound box of food. So we'd like to get the word out on that as well. Okay, so we're going to start into the meat of the presentation. And I always remind people who I am, if you need to contact us. If you have general questions, you'll talk to someone on our phone team. If you call into our number, which is on the final slide on the magnet, we're right now answering 88% of the calls when they come in. Very few go to voicemail, and we're answering in under a minute. Okay, so if you call us, we're on hold. It's not like Social Security where a minute hold means you're going to be on hold for 2 hours. It means you're probably going to get picked up pretty quickly. So feel free to give us a call Monday through Friday, 9 to 4. Okay. All right, next slide.
Hey, Matt.
Yes.
Can Dina ask you a question?
Yes.
There's some questions just online. And
Everything you just presented, a few reviewers are asking if we could have it available for download
Okay.
Maybe I can email them to the attendees, or where can I steer them to get those?
I would always just have them go to our website, for all the promotional stuff that I talked about. Or if they don't find something on there, they would just want to call us and we could mail it out to them.
What is the website?
It's Pierce, www.pierceadrc.org. Yeah, or please have them call 253-798-4600. If the intake team's not aware of what I brought today, they can just come through to me and I'll get it out to them.
The email address, which I have www.
That's the website, www.pierceadrc.org, PIERCE-ADRC.org.
And as you go through the presentation,
Yes.
you're gonna be pausing to see if
Absolutely.
people have questions.
Yeah.
Both for people here and then for people online as well. And
Absolutely,
Dina's gonna kind of man that. So
Great.
that she can, because I'm sure there's gonna be plenty of questions
okay.
about these things.
Oh,
Thanks,
great.
Matt.
Okay. That's it. Perfect.
And then what was the phone number?
253-798-4600.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, we'd love to get that information out to folks, so. Okay, I always have to give a disclaimer because I'm not an elder law attorney. I don't have any kind of legal certification. But I worked at the county for 20 years, know a lot about these documents, have gone over them with a lot of folks. So this is a presentation. It's not a training. It's not a legal consultation. It's a presentation. The information provided now is not intended to serve as an exhaustive list of legal documents used in long-term care planning. Senior spouses and partners and family caregivers needing support should review legal resources, including consultation with an elder law attorney during their planning process, just so people know that. Okay, so some of the topics we're gonna cover, about 10 of them. I'll be pausing as we go if people have questions. We'll probably finish up around 11:30 or so, depending on how many questions, maybe a little before that. So we're gonna look at why it's important for decision-making to happen. Everyone, even at an early age as an adult, needs to think about it. What are the legal documents for decision-making that are kind of the basic ones that really put a structure around your long-term care planning? We're gonna go over specifically the financial and healthcare durable power of attorney documents. We're gonna talk very briefly about protective payee documents for Social Security. We also have the advanced directives for healthcare, also known as the living will. We're gonna talk a little bit about guardianship and how those filings happen. Also gonna talk about POLST forms, also known as the DNR form. And this is something I just discovered preparing this presentation. I always thought it was a physician's order for life-sustaining treatment. It's actually a portable order for life-sustaining treatment, according to not only the state guideline I followed, but the State Medical Association guideline. So for some reason, I always thought it was physician. It's actually portable because it is portable in that it is something you could use in a variety of healthcare settings. We'll talk a little bit about hospice and palliative care services, what those mean. We'll talk a little bit about last will and testament, what that document does, and some information, resources, and legal assistance. So a lot of these terms might be familiar to you, some might not be familiar to you at all. Some of them you might think do things that they don't do, other things you might see that you didn't think they do when they do. But it's important to kind of get the verbiage down, kind of understanding the different names and things.
Is it not advancing?
Oh, there it is, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so why is it important for everyone to think about decision-making and planning for it? One thing we know is that older adults in the country are rapidly growing. The fastest growing group in the United States right now are those 80 years or older, okay? Leaves fewer young family members to provide adequate care and support for seniors. Plus, we know, as we're looking down the future, that older adult cohort is going to get bigger. The younger adult cohort is going to get smaller. People in the middle are kind of doing both things. They're taking care of children, raising families, and taking care of older adults. I think the average age at which a person starts to become an active caregiver for their parents is around the age of 48. So with me personally and my parents, it was right around age 49. With my wife, it was right around 47. So that number seems pretty accurate. People are working, more two-income household, that's been the way and it's going that way. More common, leaving less time for active care for older adults. There are fewer children being had, people are marrying later. So it means basically that there's fewer people available to act as decision makers and having the time to do it. So early planning is really important because once you get into those sandwich years, it gets very overwhelming to not have everything ready to go. One encouraging thing in my own experience, if you have these documents in place here in the state of Washington, they will be honored. Sometimes you do have to do a little bit of explaining to the people you're talking to, especially in the financial world. But on the healthcare side, I can confidently say, having been through it, your name on that document, if it's notarized or witnessed properly and you spelled out the conditions under which it happens, it will be honored. And in fact, it will be greatly appreciated because healthcare facilities need these decision makers to be out there. Because in both my mom's case and my dad's case and my uncle, who I took care of before then, they were basically unresponsive in terms of being able to cogently answer questions and express what their needs are. So having these documents in place is really important. If patients don't have a family member to make decisions, then you're paying a private care manager to do that. It gets very expensive. Most people can't afford it. You have to then apply for some government sponsored care in the home or seek placement. Even so, professional care facilities cannot act as decision makers. You know, I can't be your decision maker if I'm working with you as a family on long-term care planning as a government employee. Melissa, in the work she does in outreach, can't be your decision maker. We can provide guidance, but we can't be the decision makers. And so this is where it gets really challenging, especially when we have people with no family or estranged from family, who's going to set up these documents for them and be the decision maker for them. So later on, the right table there, those last 5 documents are the ones we'll be kind of looking at during the presentation if you want to grab those. So, okay, next slide. So more things about why it's important. So we all know people that at a very young age became ill or injured and chronically disabled, right? It happens. It could be a stroke, it could be a head injury, motor vehicle accident. We're seeing more and more people that have early onset dementia. We're seeing clients diagnosed in their 40s and 50s. We see Parkinson's disease, of course, all kinds of multiple sclerosis. A lot of neurological diseases are prominent here in the Northwest, ALS, things like that. So it can happen at any age. And so it's not just something for planning that you need to think about as you get older. You should think about it when you're younger as well. And having the documents in place are really going to save you a lot of trouble if you're in a situation where you need someone to be that decision maker. In the case of my uncle, I had a different last name than him, named Santelli. Even so, he needed to go unconscious for blood transfusions for his leukemia and was basically unresponsive for a week while they treated him at ICU at St. Joseph's. Having the document in place, very simple to take the steps I needed to take, because they would call me periodically, he needs a blood transfusion, he needs this infusion of another medication. He's waking up, but we think we should keep him asleep for his recovery. I mean, they were calling me and I was the decision maker, so it worked out just fine in that case. Family caregivers often become those who take over care and decision making. We have a lot of these family caregiver cohorts, especially with husband and wife cohorts. Our family caregiver support program, we probably have a couple hundred couples in there that we're supporting, where husband's taking wife or wife taking care of husband. However, 30 to 70%, depending upon what study you read, of husband and wife partner caregivers ages 60 and older die before their care receivers die. So the stress, the overwhelming nature of the work of being a caregiver, especially if someone has dementia, some aggressive behaviors, wandering, things like that, 30 to 70% die before the person they're giving care to dies. So planning ahead for this likelihood is essential, not only for the caregiver and care receiver, but also for everyone else in the family. So in my situation, my dad was kind of the de facto caregiver for my mom. My mom got sick first, went into care, she died first. My dad subsequently went into care after that and lived a couple of years after that. We see a lot of these caregiver cohorts though, husband and wife partner situations where caregiver dies first, care receiver has no one to take care of them. There's a scramble to get their needs met, especially if the family's been locked out of those situations, or if the family hasn't been involved. So if you know someone in that situation, please talk to them, have them call us. We do have our family caregiver support program where we provide some relief care in the home to give that caregiver a break. We provide some caregiver counseling, some medical equipment, some relief, housework and errand services. So please have them call about that. The other thing I want to emphasize, planning is a good thing. People think planning is a bad thing. And so we'll have seniors we're working with, or we'll say, what kind of long-term care planning have you done? And they'll say back to us, well, I want to do it, but my son doesn't want to do it. I'll talk to the son and saying, son, what kind of long-term care planning have you done for your parents? And he'll say, well, I want to do it, but my parents don't want to do it. So somebody's got to make the decision, all right? Someone's got to throw the topic onto the table and start working on it, okay? Because you can't go on these parallel tracks of one group saying the other group doesn't want to do it and vice versa. Somebody's got to do it. Because lacking that, it becomes very difficult. Right now, our hospitals are a good percentage full of people that don't have family members or estranged from family members who went into an ill or injured condition early or late in life. And there's no one to be a decision maker for them. This has been a huge complaint among our hospital services providers to the state legislature saying, hey, we have no way to move these people along because there's no one for us to plan with, to partner with for planning. So you don't want to leave yourself in a situation like that. Okay, any questions, comments, anything? Okay, people following along? All right, next. Okay, so the legal documents for decision-making that we're going to talk about today, this is very important. We will consider the ones that are specific to the state of Washington, okay? So we often have families that will move here from out of the area to live with a son or daughter or live closer, vice versa. We'll have sons or daughters move closer to family members in another state. Those new arrivals have to know that the documents that they have are going to be specific to their state. They may be similar, but they still have to be state legally approved, okay? So the documents we have are going to be state legally approved, all right? So if you summer in winter in Arizona, you live here, you have 2 homes, something like that, you're extended in other areas, you need to make sure you have documents in those other areas as well, okay? And it can still name the same person. You just have to make sure those documents are local, okay? Very important. Each state administers these documents specifically within their own legal guidelines for the residents of that state. So this is what's always kind of challenging for us. Washington State does things quite differently than some other states in terms of the autonomy of older adults, especially, and disabled adults. Decision-making is up to that person until such time as they're in a situation where they've assigned that decision-making to someone else, or the court has said they're not competent as the decision maker. So I always give the example of this Western State Hospital, right? I used to be a liaison out there back in the day when it had 2,000-3,000 people to be there. Now I think it has maybe 600-700 if that. None of those people, or at least most of those people, are still competent. They're still decision makers. Even though they're being held involuntarily, they're still decision makers. They sign their treatment plans and stuff. Some of them may have power of attorneys that do that for them. Some of them might have gone through the guardianship process, but even confinement in a state hospital for long-term does not mean the state thinks you're not a decision maker anymore. So just keep that in mind, because there's an assumption that, oh, if my mom or dad declines, I'll become their decision maker. Well, the state does have a decision tree under the law in terms of who becomes the de facto decision maker. The problem comes in when there's more than one person that wants to fulfill that role and the documents haven't been established yet. That's where it becomes problematic. So you don't want to be in a situation where there's siblings involved, or a husband and wife situation. One's the power of attorney for the other. They're not quite sure what's happening. They're both declining, or there's some disagreements among siblings as what's going on, who should be the decision maker. It can become very difficult, and you want to make sure whoever's making those decisions has those documents in place and has the healthcare providers a relationship with them. That's the other thing I really want to emphasize. And we talked about this a little before some folks got here. Primary care, physician primary care is very, very important as we get older. And it's difficult. There's not as many doctors around. COVID was a big hit. Retirements are a big hit. You gotta have that relationship with that primary care doctor, okay? He's not gonna be the decision maker, but he's gonna need to write orders for things you tell him to do. Going into a care facility, you're gonna need orders for that. Medical equipment, rehabilitation, you're gonna need orders, and he has to have a relationship with you. You can't knock on the doctor's door tomorrow and have never met him. He's not gonna write orders for you, so you have to have that going. We hear this a lot from seniors. My doctor doesn't listen to me. I haven't seen him in 5 years. You need to get that doctor-patient relationship going on, and it's not easy because it's hard to see them. They got very comfortable with telehealth and things during COVID. You gotta keep that relationship going, okay? Like I said, if you move to another state, you gotta update those guidelines. If you have friends or family members similarly moving to Washington State, they must update their documents to follow our state legal guidelines, okay? Any questions on that? All right, next. Okay, so first one we're gonna dive into is the durable power of attorney's documents for financial and health care. That's this one here. And this actually comes from a website called WashingtonLawHealth.org. There's a resource page at the end of the presentation today that you can take home with you with the handouts. But these are all legal documents. This was updated as recently as April 2023, okay? The legislature can make changes on these documents. The last few years, they have made some changes. They basically made them a little less foolproof, I would say, than they used to be. They've actually kind of included the person who has designated a power of attorney to be able to be a little more involved than it used to be. So we'll kind of go through some of the Q&A on it, but let's talk about again what it is, the definition. So this document designates another person or persons to be your agent to make decisions for you when you are no longer able to do so. So it's basically saying, if I'm in a situation that I can't be a wise decision maker anymore, this other person's doing the job. It's often a family member, often if it's a husband, wife, it's spouses, sometimes it's a trusted friend. This document does not persist past death, okay? This comes up a lot with our clients because we'll have a family caregiver who says, well, I don't know why they're not talking to me because I'm the power of attorney. Dead people do not have powers of attorney, okay? They have estate executors. Sometimes they have estate trustees. If there's a trust, power of attorney document ends at the time of death, okay? So keep that in mind. They should be completed by, we talked about parents, but it could be any adult consulting with trusted family members. Maybe it's a trusted family member or trusted adults. Should be written to be effective immediately. So we'll talk about that too. And avoid effective and incapacity clauses if possible. So again, this is where we're a little different than other states. I hear from people who in other states who say, well, it's very simple with my dad in Nebraska, whatever the case might be. His doctor just had to sign that he wasn't capable of being decision maker anymore, and then I became the power of attorney. It doesn't work that way here in the state of Washington. The only person that can assign that responsibility is the person in question. So it would be me telling my wife, you're gonna be my power of attorney, or my adult son. I could go to the Kaiser doctor all day long. He's not gonna take care of this, okay? Nor will he want to. So keep that in mind. And this document has to be done with a person who is of sound mind, okay? Again, this becomes a problem. We have clients whose parents are in their 80s. Dad took a fall, he's unresponsive, unconscious. There's no document in place. What do? Our mom's already declining with dementia. She doesn't even know what the document is. And so then you're stuck because it's supposed to be someone of sound mind saying, I want to assign my decision-making to this other person. So the state laws in Washington, you got to be mindful of that. You can't do it at the last minute. You can't do it with someone who's unconscious. You can't do it with someone who's already suffering from dementia, who might be a stroke ridden and have their brain affected by that. Because you have to do it in front of two disinterested witnesses if no notary is available, or in front of a notary. And that notary should be reviewing what the document is with the person who's signing it, if they know what it means, who they are, all those things. And if they can't confirm that information, then they can't notarize the document. So any questions on that? Yes.
You said that the legislature can and does make changes.
Yes.
If our documents were done with our lawyer, say 5 years ago, is
Yes.
it still
Yes, it should still be good. We typically remind people to have a review of that every few years. I think 5 years, you probably want to review it and see if it is meeting the current standards, if anything's changed.
And the lawyers would be aware.
Absolutely, yeah, they should definitely be aware of that. And that's why this date on here, April 2023, does change, because they're a group of lawyers who put these documents together online. And so something different might happen next year. So good question, though, very good question. Let's see, so that incapacity clause, the reason I say that again is because people in the state of Washington, again, unlike other states, the state of Washington, trying to get a doctor to declare an incapacity, in my experience, with my uncle, my parents, my in-laws, is virtually impossible, okay? They're not designed to be determiners of capabilities of their patients. Ask your doctor to take away your mom or dad's or your partner's driving rights and see what kind of conversation you have. It will be a very unpleasant one, because the doctor's gonna say, I don't know, I don't drive with your dad, I don't drive with your husband, but look, he's so confused. I don't know what his driving's like, right? Doctors aren't driving evaluators. Doctors are not competency evaluators, okay? So keep that in mind. They might even render a dementia diagnosis or some sort of brain impact from a trauma. They're still not going to declare that person incapacitated. If you find a doctor like that, then it's like gold, because they're very hard to come by. And that's why I say, again, I'm not an attorney, but with my parents, my uncle, my in-laws, these attorney documents became effective immediately, okay? Now, that doesn't mean you're using them. That just means they're effective, okay? Because if your parents are already declining, or they're older adult, you kind of know what their health history, or husbands and wife know that. It could be tomorrow, it could be next week, it could be a month from now, it could be a year, or maybe they're gonna die and you're never gonna need to use this document. But by the time you have to declare them incapacitated, the game's gone, okay? So you need to have it make effect immediately, and then you put it in a secure place and you use it only when you absolutely have to use it after the bad things have happened. Yes,
Ken, I ran into something here just recently with the power of attorney.
okay.
Is there a standard form that is kind of accepted all over the place, like from the lawyer's office, or this form?
Yes, yes,
Because the bank was trying to tell me that it had to be on their
yes,
letter.
yes. This comes up a lot. It does come up a lot. So that's why I mentioned about financial and having to educate them. The statute says that they have to honor this document, but they'll often put some sort of proprietary form in front of you and say, no, this is our document. So if you're in a position where that other document cannot be completed, it's easier not to fight them if you can. But if you're in a position where you can't make that happen, then you need to get back to your attorney, and he's gonna need to send them a clarification letter to say you are not following the state of Washington guidelines when it comes to
Okay.
how this is honored.
Now, if the people are disabled and say like, you couldn't get to your bank to do all of that, you know, sign it and everything else.
Yes,
But we found a notary that comes to your house.
yes,
That's perfectly okay
yes.
to have that done, as long
Absolutely.
as he's licensed by the state of Washington.
Yeah, mobile notary services have gotten very popular the last few years, especially during COVID. They were doing a lot of work. We've used mobile notary. We've used them not only professionally, but in our personal lives. And as long as they have an active current notary license and they can stamp it, then that's as good as any other notary person will.
So on the bank side and stuff like that, they're trying to kind of give us a stone wall sort of, you know, because he kept saying, now, I'm not an attorney, you know, and
Yeah.
red flags went up.
Exactly. So you gotta keep in mind, the banks are generally nationally affiliated. And so they might have a national standard that their attorneys have said to them that they have to follow. But in the state of Washington, this is the document that's legal, the one that's in here, okay? So you may need to get some sort of intervention believe me, when I had a living trust with my parents, with local banks and trying to set up bank accounts, I was back and forth with our attorney multiple times. Him sending clarifications to them, citing the statutes, all that. It's time consuming and frustrating. So if you can do it and not have a fight about it, it's preferable. But if you get into the fight, you're in good standing if you have these documents in place, okay? The other thing that comes up a lot that we hear is that they want an original of the document. So my parents had multiple accounts spread over multiple places. They all wanted an original document, okay? My mom, at that point, as she was declining, was not able to sign multiple original documents. Again, the statute says you have in your possession the original and you can provide them with copies, okay? And if at worst comes to worst, you bring that original to them and they scan it and verify its signature that we saw the original, okay? But they should not be demanding your original copy. And again, this is something that we hear from families after the fact where they've had mom sit down and exhaustively sign 12 original documents, have each one notarized. I mean, that should not be happening, but we hear it does happen. The other thing you could do, you could record these at the auditor's office. You could have an officially recognized recorded original document, and then you could pull that as your original if you need to. So there's some workarounds there, okay? Okay, so I don't even know what I have on the next slide. Why don't you move it, Melissa? Okay, so we'll not worry about that. So this is the form. So it does say you should sign it in front of a notary. If you can't find a notary, you can sign it in front of two disinterested witnesses. Like this woman was saying, it's much easier just to get a mobile notary out. Two disinterested witnesses can mean a lot of different things. I don't know the definition, but what was your mobile notary service have recently? $75 to come and do it to your house?
25.
25, yeah, really good deal.
He lived real close to my sister anyway,
Yeah.
so it was, but he's like within an area of Tacoma.
Yeah.
Like is 25.
Exactly.
Very, very nice gentleman too, I must say, because he was a senior. He got, he retired, and then after retirement started, he saw there was a great need
Yeah.
for
That-
seniors.
Yeah, it's a great example. We see a lot of retirees doing it as kind of a side job. You see people side gigging it too. Again, what you're gonna run into, your bank probably does have a notary, but your bank's notary is probably gonna say they'll only notarize their bank's documents, okay? So that's why these mobile notary services can really come in handy for that kind of thing. And then as it reads, what do you do after you have it signed? After you sign it, make 2 copies, give the original document to the power of attorney, give 1 copy to a secondary, keep the second copy for yourself. And I cannot emphasize enough, again, we had my parents sign these in 2012 after my mom recovered from her appendectomy as part of the living trust we put together. Her decline did not start to happen until probably 2017. So you need to know where these documents are, okay? You need to know where they are. I can't emphasize this enough, because yours are 5 years old, you said?
About that.
Yeah, you gotta know where they are and check where they are. You don't wanna be rummaging through safe deposit boxes and cabinets at home, trying to find them when you need them. Because you're not gonna know when you need them, right? You're gonna need them when you least expect it, and then you're gonna need to know where they are, okay? So don't let them decay, because they could sit in there for years. Ours sat in there for, what did I say, 5 years before we ever used it. So you wanna make sure it's active and you know where it is, it's complete. And ideally, once it's signed, you make sure it gets out to the people who need to know, like doctors' offices, like attorneys' offices, like banks. Get in early on this process, because you don't want to have the fights like you were having late in the process. Get those fights settled early, okay? And this is where it comes down to trust. This is something I can't train anyone on, because it's trust within your own families and who that trusted person is going to be. And believe me, it may not be that person you think it is. So you need to have a conversation with them, what they're capable of doing, okay? You need to know that family member or sibling or adult child who's the one that's maybe around you the most, but proximity doesn't mean capability, okay? In my experience of families, proximity doesn't necessarily mean capability. Just what I mean, The one closest to you may not want to be the best decision maker for you. And that's just you making a judgment on who that person in the family could be. Could be the youngest, could be the middle, could be the oldest. You got to think about that. Yes.
I don't know if you know the answer to this or not, but if a bank account is a joint account, is there anything that needs to be done?
So if it's a joint account, that other person under the banking rules has complete access to that account. Okay. Most banks in the state of Washington set it up that way. I heard in some other states that there's some gradations there, but in this state, in my experience, if there's another name on that account, they have complete access to that account. I think there's some situations where you can put an and on there, so both parties have to sign for every transactions. Most banks prefer that you don't do that, because then you're basically back to the same problem if that person gets sick or injured. So one of the first things we did in our planning is exactly that. We put our names, my brother and myself, in addition to mom and dad, each of us or on the account. So there was no problem making withdrawals, making deposits, writing checks, whatever we needed to do. But again, that's an extra step. That's a step where you're basically having control already. The power of attorney starts you down that road, but it's not really taking control unless you want to take control. Sometimes that's the easier conversation to have with people than it is to say, oh, by the way, I'm going to put you on the bank account as well. So that could be problematic for some folks. So it's pretty clear, the forms really, most people can understand them. I don't understand a lot of the legalese. But like I was saying, on number 5, if we're looking at durable power of attorney for finances, start date. This power of attorney document is effective, check 1, immediately, or only if my medical provider signs a letter saying I cannot make decisions for myself. So if you don't believe me, go have this conversation with your doctor and see what he says. He's gonna say, checkbox number 1, don't talk to me about this ever again, okay? That's what the conversation is gonna be like. I could be wrong. My experience over 3 different people in different situations was they are not gonna sign this document and help you become the decision maker. Just think of all the stories we've heard, right? The most famous one, Casey Kasem, remember America's Top 40, all the craziness with that family. Now what's going on in California, remember Richard Simmons, sweating to the 90s, that energetic little guy. His estate's in question now. He's supposedly being isolated by his agent. There's family members inviting it out. A doctor's not going to get in the middle of that, right? Unless you pay him a lot of money as a professional witness of some kind, but your average primary care doctor, these are the fights that they would have too. I mean, not defending them, they have their own role, but imagine if they signed that. And then some shirt-tailed son or daughter jumps in, who's never been involved with your parents at all, or with you, and says, wait a minute, I talked to mom for years, she's fine. I'm gonna sue you, you asshole. Excuse my language. That's what they're worried about, right? Those kinds of disputes, they don't wanna be in the middle of that, okay? And again, I could be completely wrong. You might find a golden doctor who's willing to do it. This isn't a criticism of them. It's just an understanding of what their role is, okay? Any comments or questions on that?
I think a lot of times just, larger healthcare systems really also don't want their providers to get entangled in any sort of,
Absolutely.
legal matter of the family. And so
Absolutely.
it's not even a decision of the primary care provider.
Absolutely.
Of the larger organization.
Absolutely, that's an excellent point, because as we know, here in Pierce County, we're pretty much divvied up. We got Kaiser, we got Multicare, we got Provision, Mason, Franciscan now, we got community healthcare. There's a few independent providers sprinkled in here and there, but you're right, they're kind of part of larger networks, and there's legal services that kind of govern what things that they can do and interventions they can do, this being one of them. So just keep that in mind. That's why, again, I'm not an attorney, but in my family situations, these documents took effect immediately. And again, all that meant is that, great, we've got it, it's signed, we know where it is, got copies, gave them to the proper people, put them in the drawer, and that's it. And didn't see them for 5 years, okay? And then it can be revoked. There's a revocation clause in there. Number 8 kind of lists the powers and what it allows the person to do as the designated agent. And you can add any special powers in there, especially related to trust documents. I'm not a financial planner, we won't go into that, but this is something new that was added to kind of allow powers in trust making. The documents, when we had them, did not have a provision like this, so we separately had to set up the trust with its own power of attorney to say, The trustee is managing this trust vehicle. Now this gives a little leeway there. And we look on the back page, it has all kinds of additional things on beneficiary designation, gifting of money and property. These are separate from the decision-making, goes into a little bit more of the financial world and making some pretty significant things like real estate transfers and things like that. And then it also kind of talks about HIPAA release in terms of privacy, sharing information and things like that. And then it has the notary stamp there. So it's pretty straightforward in what it allows. And people recognize the document, kind of recognize the language. And then there's also the one for healthcare that's attached as well. So you basically have the whole package here. You see some that combine the two for convenience. Personally, I like to keep them separate because I want a financial side, healthcare side. They're two very different decision-making processes. So look at provision 4 there. It's a durable. By durable, it says, my agent can still use this power of attorney to manage my affairs, even if I become sick or injured and cannot make decisions for myself. This power of attorney shall not be affected by my disability, okay? So some of them back in the day were written kind of backwards in my view, where they were active and then they became inactive and the person became less capable. So that's why that provision is in there. There's some legacy documents that kind of had it the other way around. Has the start date. And again, start date, this power of attorney document is effective on the day I sign it. And the law specifically states that. That doesn't mean that all of a sudden control changes hands. All it means is you're ready if control has to change hands. So when I signed these with my parents, nothing had changed. My mom still went to the doctor's appointments on her own. She kind of reported out to me. She still went to the bank. Nothing changed, okay? We just had the ability to make changes if we needed to, and that happened pretty quickly when it happened. My mom went from being very capable to one day she couldn't write checks anymore. She couldn't figure out the stove. She was leaving water on, flooding out the bathroom a couple of times. I mean, it happened within a few weeks' time. That's how rapid it was, and it just got worse from there, so. And then it has some special provisions on government benefits, mental health treatment, accounting, things like that, and the notary stamp on the back. So this is pretty much your whole package on the power of attorney documents right here, healthcare and financial. So if you want to take advantage of this, like I said, that dementia legal planning service that's back there, one of the handouts. If it's a situation where you're kind of having to navigate that, please give them a call. There's also a separate dementia directive that can go with this. But this is true for, you can do this now without any kind of concern of trying to make an argument the person's ill or not ill. They have to be capable to sign the documents. And this is what trips up a lot of people, because people will say, well, my dad or mom doesn't want to sign this, you know, they're fine. That's when they need to sign it, when they're fine, okay? Because when they've had the stroke, they can't sign it, okay? And you can't fake it for them, okay? Believe me, we've had clients ask us things like that. Well, what if I held my dad's hand and he had the pen in his hand, and if I signed it for him? Yeah, good luck with that. That's a bad idea. That's fraud. Okay, you can't do that. Plus the notary, if they're worth the money, should say, you're not doing this correctly, okay? And that sounds silly, but those are the things we hear. We generally get the calls after the illness or injuries happen and there's no documents in place. So what do we do then? Okay. Questions, comments on that? Okay. One of the things I want people to know, again,
I
yes.
have a question, I'm sorry. If the durable power of attorney is written, as you said, to where is it immediately active? What protects the elderly person from being taken over or railroaded by the person they put in charge? Hope that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense, and that's where the trust of that person comes into play. It never was a question with my parents. They kind of knew I was the professional in the family, in the social services world. I was the youngest. And we had that conversation for a long time, for months, I would say, talking about we need to get ready to do this. And then it was only after my uncle had the leukemia and then my mom had her appendectomy and almost died and recovered at age 86, whatever she was, that finally they said, okay, yeah, you're right. We need to get these documents in place. So if you have a concern that the person you're designating might drain your bank account, you probably shouldn't designate that person. That sounds like a flippant answer, but you just have to know that this person is trustworthy and is going to take the actions when needed and make the proper choices. So hard to be 100% on that. So
Anyone else have any comments on that? If you've done this process?
Do the durable power of attorneys ever expire in the state of Washington?
No, although we do hear from places that they want one current within about 5 years. A lot of places will say you need to update this. I don't know what an attorney would tell you about that. Obviously, he felt okay that you signed these and yeah, said come back and sign new ones. But I don't know what the standard would be. You might want to talk to that dementia legal planning phone number that's on the handout still on the left side of the table there and see what they might say about that. Because there may be a standard underneath that I'm not aware of. There's nothing saying in here that it needs to be renewed periodically. I think it would probably be good form to do that though, so. Anybody else have comments on that or things they might have heard? Okay. So, as I was saying, state relevant document. Federal agencies do not recognize these documents, okay? So this comes up a lot because clients will call and say, wait a minute, you sent me these power of attorney documents, I filled them out with my mom, I went down to Social Security and they said they wouldn't honor it. It's because it's a state level document, okay? It's not federal. Social Security and Medicare are federal benefits, okay? So if you were to call Social Security and start asking questions, they would ask you to identify yourself. And then if you told them I'm mom or dad's power of attorney, they would say, I'm sorry, we cannot talk with you, okay? This becomes problematic because I was never payee for my mom or dad. I was power of attorney. They both had Social Security among other income, but we did get on the bank accounts. So that's how we worked around that because I knew they weren't moving anywhere and we weren't going to change their banks. So it didn't matter to me to talk to Social Security because the money came in, the documents got sent out at the end of the year. I think I did do a socialsecurity.gov account so I could access things for them. But it really never became an issue because nothing changed on the Social Security. If anything, that was probably the easiest thing to manage because you get the cost of living increase, money hits the bank every month, write out the checks, had access to the account, not a problem at all. You can become a protected payee. That's something Social Security administers, so you can act on their behalf with Social Security, obtain information and make changes when needed. Or you can go on the website, take a look at what it has to say about that. It is an extra step, and if you take that step, you do have to report out to Social Security periodically how you're spending that money for that person. I didn't take that extra step. I never had a problem, but I'm not advising you to not take the step, but you do have to be a reporter because you're then administering those funds. Anyone ever become a protected payee? Want to comment on that? Yes.
We have to go before a judge and present every dime that you spent.
Okay, so it's even more burdensome.
And you have to show up at court and you are, yeah, it's a deal.
How periodically does that reporting out have to happen?
When we first got to the state, we had to go every year.
Wow,
And
Okay.
then we graduated to every 3 years.
okay. So there's a period where they're kind of seeing how accountable you are, and then they give you a little leeway then after that.
We had monies put into a trust account,
Okay,
and then we have to take it out of the trust into a regular checking account because the trust accounts don't allow you to use a debit card.
oh my goodness.
So then you're going on old fashioned check. We're like,
Yeah,
well, this is, so anyway. that's-
very troublesome, okay.
Yes,
Thank you for clarifying that. It's a lot of work.
it's a lot of work.
Yeah. And by the way, we came in late, but those 5 documents on the right table are relevant to what we're talking
Thank you.
about, so all right there, so. So great, thanks for chiming in on that. So that's one thing to think about. And I remember, I gotta share this with you guys. I remember once when we did try calling Social Security, I think because my mom's new benefit letter hadn't arrived and my dad's had, you know, they come out typically, I think in January, telling you what your current amount of your late December. And so, foolishly, of course, I wrote out a script for my mom, you know, mother's maiden name, your Social Security number, your address. Of course, it absolutely failed, you know, 2 hours on hold, my mom gets on the phone, she doesn't know who she's talking to, she can't hear them, they're asking her questions. She starts trying to read, Matthew, what does this say? Maiden? Oh, Madame? What did you write here? And so the agent, to their credit, said, this doesn't sound legit. I'm sorry, I'm hanging up. So
they got a job to do too, the agents do, because there's so much scamming and fraud that goes on. So if it sounds unusual to them, if they're a good agent, they're not gonna talk to you, rightfully so. You don't want some joker calling in to pretend to be your mom's son or daughter that isn't, that has their information and can start making changes on their social security. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so now we're in the advanced directive. Are people feeling like they're following along? People need to take a break, feeling comfortable? Keep going, okay. So healthcare directive or living will. Why is this needed? So we looked at the durable power of attorney form that's designating an agent to be your decision maker. But as you look back on that form, it doesn't say what those decisions might look like, right? It's just basically saying, I'm giving over judgment on decision-making to this other person. Sometimes that's enough. Back in the day, that was kind of the accepted standard. And then over the last few decades, the whole idea of a living will or an advanced directive became more into the focus. And so healthcare directive, a document also known as living will, providing instructions that the designated agent that we just talked about can follow for your end of life wishes, like medical treatments you do or do not wish to have if you are terminally ill or permanently unconscious, unable to make decisions. Also, instructions for when you're dying might include whether you want only hospice care to keep you comfortable and free from pain. We'll talk more about that. Whether you want artificial hydration, whether you want artificial nutrition or other means of life support. An even more extensive kind of living will document, and I was happy I saw that had more of these in the resource room this morning than I thought. This really is a booklet you can really easily go through with someone you're talking to about this and go step by step, talking about what your wishes would be, final wishes, how you use the document, have some guidance on picking the right person to be your healthcare agent, has a lot of in-depth kind of discussion about different healthcare situations and what they might look like and what you want to do, how you understand life support. Like on the page 8, wish 3, my wish for how comfortable I want to be. Wish 4, my wish for how I want people to treat me. Wish 5, my wish for what I want my loved ones to know. So this is really almost like a diary of your end of life wishes to put them together ahead of time, okay? This is a really useful guide when you're thinking about what it means to be someone that has an advanced directive. So basically, you're walking around as the agent and mom or dad are in a situation then where they're starting to decline and you're having to start to think about what end of life would look like. This is kind of the script for you to follow that you put in place ahead of time. So I'll give you an example. You know, my mom was declining and so she wasn't conscious anymore in the care facility. They couldn't really tell us if she could hear us or not, but they said she wasn't in any pain. So they weren't infusing her with any morphine or anything like that. So you know, I would talk to her, whisper to her, say things to her, my dad would, and my brothers and sisters. But then when it came time to where it really seemed like the decline was there, the signs were there, from what the medical knowledge is of the dying process. And they, at the care facility, of course, were thinking, well, we need to maintain her capabilities. And so they would continually try to hydrate her, try to feed her artificial nutrition, try to get her to drink like those milkshakes and things. She just wasn't able to do it anymore. And so that's when I brought hospice in, and the hospice evaluators, and we'll talk a little bit more about hospice, basically said, you know, her body can't absorb nutrition or hydration. And so our recommendation is that you just stop those things because it's just pushing in things into her body that the body can't absorb. And there was a little bit of discussion among my siblings about that, what that meant. That means she'd be in pain and all that stuff. And so fortunately, in the document, my mom had said, no artificial hydration, no artificial nutrition, if I'm in an end of life stage, basically. So that document helped us kind of get over that hurdle about worrying about that. So we didn't have to really fight that out. And you can also list your healthcare values in there, wishes and preferences. Examples given here, what matters to me most is being in a hospital with excellent care. Quality of life is more important to me than getting a lot of medical care. You might hear different things from people about different things about that. I want to spend my last days at home. I love jazz music. I would like to listen to it whenever possible. These healthcare directives, advanced wills, have become a much bigger document than they used to be in kind of giving you options
as the agent on the script that you want to follow to accommodate what those wishes are. And again, like we talked about, you can't do this with someone who's demented. You can't do this with someone whose brain's been affected by a stroke or a head injury or a semi-conscious. You need to do this early, right? So people can list things out. My dad grew up in southern Italy in a province called Calabria. He loved Calabrese music. We never talked about that. You know, would you like to have Calabrian music playing when you're passing? And so I was able to find some online and played some of those for him in the last week before he passed. But I wish I had talked to him about that. It would have been really nice. So this has a nice guide in here, healthcare values, what makes my life worth living, my hopes. It almost mirrors kind of an abbreviated version of the 5 wishes document. Talks about pain management, fears about experiencing pain, where I want to be, other things to know about me, and in terminal illness or permanent unconscious conditions, in terms of comfort care, withdrawing life support, artificial nutrition, etc., all those things. Now, I'll tell you, in our experience, the care facility was really designed to try to maintain my mom's and dad's health both when they were passing. So late in the process, for example, my dad developed an infection and a fever. And so I just went ahead and said, we'll give him antibiotics. And then the hospice folks said, well, you know, antibiotics, he's passing, it's really not going to do anything. And so at that point, we kind of, again, talked to them versus the care facility and what they wanted to do and said, okay, don't keep trying to treat him because he's in the passing. And then you learn things. One thing I learned is that fever is kind of a symptom of end of life, because basically all your blood pulls into your torso to keep you alive. And so your extremities get cold, but your torso heats up. This is something I didn't know. Again, I'm not a doctor. I'm just trying to remember what was said about that. So you learn some things about the dying process when this happens. So it's really handy to have this script, because you can fall into disputes. You can feel like, geez, you're making some pretty monumental decisions for someone without having proper guidance. And so having this information in place is really useful. And again, it was an easy script for me to follow those last few weeks when they were calling me and asking me different things, what we want to have happen. Plus we have the hospice overlay as well. So has anyone been willing to share they've had a living will in terms of someone they knew, a friend or family member, and was it useful for you? Or okay, believe me, it's useful. It was useful for me to have them when we had them. So I really encourage
say
you.
real quick.
Yeah, listen.
So we've had patients in our mobile integrated health program that, you know, we've introduced these documents to, and they have used them. The 5 wishes document, I think it goes about sort of asking questions in a more gentle way, because this is a really difficult subject, you know, to have and to talk about, like, with your loved ones. And so I really like how it's put together, and I know a lot of other people do as well. And then the other thing that I think that, you know, I've seen this document do, whether it's 5 wishes or, you know, a different format, is it's really like a kindness, you know, to like adult children, whoever is caring for you, if you're the person, you know, that's putting it together, because just like you said, Matt, you're able to really easily refer to the document. You know, there'll be a lot of conversations among like adult children. Well, mom said this to me. Well, she didn't say that to me. She said this to me,
Exactly.
right? And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
it's already a really stressful time. And then people often come about it well-intended, but you know, it creates sort of more stress. It makes things more difficult. So
Yes.
having something to be able to refer to, I think, yeah, is a kindness to the people that are trying to help that person. And it decreases the stress and makes things much more clear.
Absolutely.
Which I know for my own grandparent and
Yeah.
everything, I was so grateful that he had all those things, you know, put together and everything. So it didn't have to be my decision.
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right there, Melissa. It really does make it feel like you're kind of following a script that you've shared with that person that you're caring for, that family member that you've already discussed, and you have a memory of going over it with them and making sure they understood it. Plus it even jumps into like past end of life. If you're thinking about burial, funeral, things like that, there's often very strong feelings in families about that. I know my parents, who were lifelong Catholics, very late in life when we finally went over all these, surprised me and both said, oh, we want to do cremation.
So I made sure, I talked to the parish where we're members in Tacoma, and they said, yeah, it's approved now under Catholic doctrine. You simply have to keep the ashes in a vessel and bury them together. And so we actually did the vessel, we cremated, put their ashes into the vessel like an urn, and then we actually got like a miniature kid's casket, I guess it would be, with the casket, so we could put flowers in there. So we put the urn in the casket, buried that casket. Not necessary to do it that way, the urn itself has to be buried, but that's how we did it. So make sure you kind of in concordance, like Melissa was saying, in that planning with faith communities and faith understandings in terms of burial and stuff like that. It's important to know that. Again, I had one family member who was shocked that they were planning to do cremation because she was convinced that it wasn't part of Catholic doctrine, and for decades or centuries it wasn't, but it is now. So we needed to do a little bit of education on that. So, and you know, again, it's tough enough to plan a funeral. I've done 3 now. I've actually done 5. And my uncle, both parents, and my in-laws. And they're not an easy thing to do. And it's basically the family planning it. You know, there's not like a funeral planner. I mean, they can help plan what it's going to look like, but in terms of music, readings, things like that, who's going to get the eulogy, that's up to the family to decide what the flowers are going to look like. So yeah, the more planning you can do, the better, like Melissa was saying, it makes it a lot easier for everybody. So. Okay, next. Okay, so assuming that you had someone in the family, wanted to get all this done, didn't get it done, there is another process called guardianship that the state allows. And a guardian is a person appointed by the court to help you make decisions about your health, safety, and self-care. You don't really need one if you have a durable power of attorney document in place. Even without the durable power of attorney document, only in some rare situations would you need to have a guardian assigned to you. However, even with the document of durable power of attorney, there are some certain decisions or some other problems that come up. You might need to have a guardian or conservative appointed for you. This is an adversarial process, meaning that a person can fight or oppose this petition for guardianship. You have the right to have a lawyer help you. If you cannot afford a lawyer, the court will appoint one for you at public expense. So again, this is something I hear from other states where they'll say, well, in my state, I just needed the doctor to sign and then get some sort of psych eval, and then I was appointed my mom or dad's guardian. Much more complicated here in the state of Washington. If it's a family member, if you wanted to do this, you would actually have to hire an attorney who is skilled in guardianship petitioning to the court. They then appoint what's known as a guardian ad litem, who's kind of a neutral observer that works with the court to kind of take a look at what's going on and determine back to make a report to the court saying, I've seen evidence of competency, I see evidence of failing competency. That process can take months in many cases. Just getting on the docket can take a long time. And then it's up to the judge to ultimately decide, is this person competent or no longer? So that's the one situation, like we talked about, competency, where the state is proclaiming that you're no longer competent to make your decisions. The guardian then takes over. Even so, the guardian acts very much like a durable power of attorney would if you're not able to respond. And so they can take certain actions, like a durable power of attorney can take actions. In terms of handling you, they can't do that. And so a lot of family members, again, get very frustrated when they have someone's declining, mom or dad, she's wandering, she's flooding out the house, she won't accept any help, she's long past the point where she even understands she needs help. And they talk about guardianship. And so we're like, yeah, you can be the guardian, and the state will recognize that, and financial institutions will recognize that. But that still doesn't mean you can handle her and put her somewhere. There's no confinement police. Melissa's team doesn't do that. They don't go in and grab someone, put them somewhere, unless there's an emergency situation where they're in emergent need of medical care. But if they're just making problems for themselves, their community, their families, you don't have that capacity. Maybe you could comment on that if that comes up periodically.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that a lot of people do kind of misunderstand the fact that they believe that if someone is kind of putting themselves at danger, at risk, I think, you know, someone with like dementia or Alzheimer's would be a good
Yes.
example of that. And, you know, leaving the house, like, you know, their family thinks, well, something awful could happen to them. There has to be some sort of imminent risk, and Washington's laws really support the individual to be able to have autonomy. I mean, even to the point where, you know, like our teams and everything have, you know, contacted like APS and, you know, because they, in our eyes, we feel like they really are at imminent risk and they're putting themselves at danger. And the only thing that surprises me is if there is actual action taken
Yes.
to take the rights away from that individual. I have seen it extremely rarely. And usually it happens if they're in the hospital.
Yeah.
Not in their home.
Yeah. And when I was talking about legislative changes, I don't want to go in depth into guardianship. They made it harder for families to become guardians of people that are in incredible risk situations. They've actually made the process more difficult. So that's the state of Washington. Let me give you another example. In the state of Washington, Melissa and I are examples of what are known as mandatory reporters. So if we see some sort of elder abuse, neglect, exploitation, or self-neglect in our judgment as reasonable professionals, we're required or mandated to make a report to APS, which is Adult Protective Services, kind of the adult counterpart to CPS. Financial institutions, they are what's known as permissive reporters. So they can make a report based on their judgment and they do not face any consequences in terms of liability if they choose to make a report. Melissa and I are mandated to make a report. We do incur liability if we don't make a report as professionals. So this is an example where for years, there's been some senior lobby that says financial institutions should be mandatory reporters. There's other senior lobby and other advocates who say financial institutions should not be mandatory reporters. So there's kind of a halfway point they met where they're permissive reporters. So when we talked about bank accounts and things, some banks, mom or dad could go in there when they've never shown up at the bank for years and start drawing out thousands and thousands of dollars, writing tons of checks, some of which aren't being covered. Some of the banks are permissive reporters and they kind of understand that and will make a report. Some of them won't because they're not mandated to do that. That's a state legislative decision. You want to comment on that?
I was just gonna say, I mean, even if that is the case and they report it to APS's ability to be able to do something to
Yes.
actually stop that from happening. I mean, we've seen extreme examples of this case where nothing has been done.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, if the person was cognitively able, there's no way that they'd be making the decisions that are resulting in, you know, major financial hardship for themselves, and their future, but.
Absolutely.
And nothing still is done, even though it's reported,
Yes.
because of the laws in our state. So just something
Yes.
that further kind of supports, plan ahead
Planning,
before
way
someone
ahead.
has cognitive decline.
absolutely, absolutely, because those changes can happen pretty rapidly. At any given time, we get calls from clients, families regarding folks who get caught up in sweepstakes scams, they get caught up in online financial scams. Just this last week, my wife on Facebook Messenger was reading something from what looked like it was coming from another friend of ours who had tickets for the Taylor Swift show coming up, 4 tickets for $1,000, which I guess is something of a bargain in the Taylor Swift world. And we're like, wow, that's really odd. I mean, who would she have had? Why would she have Taylor Swift tickets? And then we're kind of like, well, we better not call her because, you know, kind of embarrassing. This is a friend that we didn't think was a Taylor Swift fan. Some people are, some aren't. Well, then sure enough, she called us and said, hey, by the way, those messages you're getting, they're scams. Okay, my Facebook account got hacked. I've been getting calls from all my friends saying, how the hell did you get Taylor Swift tickets and why are you selling them? And she actually got some legitimate inquiries from parents locally, like, oh, I'd love to have those tickets for my kids and her friends. And then I researched it, sure enough, nationwide, there's a whole Facebook hacking thing going on with Taylor Swift tickets, and all these scams. People have actually sent thousands of dollars to these phony accounts, never see the money again. So this is how predatory our financial world is, especially for seniors and people who don't understand the technology and how dangerous it could be. So planning early, you got to get in early and active, be ready, because you're going to be the one that's going to clean up those messes if they do occur. Again, you might not even know about it from the bank, because of how the laws are written as being permissive reporters. You'd hear about it from Melissa and I circuitously if we make the report to Bill Protective Services and they investigate and involve you as a family member. But even so, the outcome where something significant would happen to make a change there, it's gonna fall back on you. You guys are gonna be the problem solvers if you have the power of attorney and you're on the bank accounts, all those things. You're gonna be the problem solvers. Believe me, I went through it, solving a lot of problems there. Okay, so next. Okay, so POLST forms, this also goes into a legal document. I do not have them because these are documents you need to get from your doctor. I think you guys have some, what's that, POLST or DNR?
I believe so. Usually people go to their primary care
Okay, yeah,
provider.
something really should happen with the doctor, because the doctor actually has to sign the form. I think, surprising to me when I was researching this, not only did I have the name wrong, I always thought it was physician orders for life-sustaining treatment. It's actually portable orders for life-sustaining treatment. But it is something you do with your primary care physician, because it's basically declaring that in the event that you become seriously ill or in very poor health, physician PA or ARNP can use the portable order for life-sustaining treatment to represent your wishes for future care as clear and specific medical orders, indicating what types of life-sustaining treatment you want or do not want in the case of a medical emergency. So some of the caveats there are that seriously ill or in very poor health. So it's basically saying, like my mom, when she was unconscious for several weeks, the last few weeks of my dad's life when he was basically delirious, should they have gone into cardiac arrest, would we want anything to happen to them? And again, this is my mom or dad already had this discussion with the doctor. Or do we just let them pass comfortably, okay? So this isn't something that's generally part of this early planning we're talking about. I mean, you could certainly put it in place. The sooner you get it, the better, but it's the same way. Even if you had it in place, if your mom or dad was healthy, maybe they're 55, 60, had a strenuous day in the yard, they have a heart attack. Well, of course you want them resuscitated, right? That was my dad into his 90s. I would want him resuscitated. During those last 2 weeks of life, not so much, right? So it's situational and it's based upon the situation of being seriously ill or in very poor health. And you guys have to respond to these, right, Melissa?
Yeah, I believe we, a lot of times people will put them on the refrigerator
Yeah.
as a magnet so that when we respond, we can see that. And then the other thing is, I mean, pretty much any, primary care system, unless they're truly like a one doc shop, right? They're gonna be part of EHR, employee health record, which is basically just your health records. And when you fill out a POLST form, it will go into that system. And the system around here mostly is called Epic. And so if you go to the hospital, then whatever providers treat you would be able to also see that at that time. And I think, this is also, a great document to be able to really discuss with your provider, so that people can understand, like if CPR is done and, you're 90 years old, like what that looks like, because, I think a lot of people don't understand like physically, like what the ramifications are in that sort of situation. So it's always great to just ask like really clear questions so that you can really make an informed decision.
Generally anymore, even for the most basic medical procedure, now when you go in, I'm 58 now, but even the last few years, they've asked if you have a POLST form. It's pretty common. They want to have that guidance, no different than the living will, except this is telling them in those acute care situations, what do you want us to do? And again, a lot of this goes back to, we talked about medical liability and things like that. So they really want those instructions to happen. Like Melissa said, situations, especially people and older adults, osteoporosis, other conditions where their bone density might be not so strong as it once was, that CPR process can do some damage in the process of reviving somebody. So you want to make sure that those decisions are written down. And that's a discussion, like I said, early on in this presentation about having that positive relationship with your primary care provider. And the advantage is, like Melissa said, once it's established in that doctor's office, they'll scan it into their system. And so they shouldn't ask for it every time you go in. I just kind of kept those documents with me at all times when I was out and about in a file in the trunk of my car. So that if I had to respond quickly, that I had them to show. Yes.
How does it differ from the DNR? Because the doctor's offices are still asking for a DNR. I had heard about this and talked to one of the doctors, and he said that's more if you're in a long-term state of, that he was defining it a little differently.
You know the difference, Melissa? We were always told that say POLST, not DNR anymore, so.
Yeah, I don't know, in the last, I would say 10 years or so, just, being part of the healthcare community. Yeah, I guess it probably depends on, who you speak to. I've heard most providers, in healthcare systems talk about the POLST form, because I think it's more expansive
Yeah.
than just, because it's not necessarily just a DNR, do not
Yeah.
resuscitate. And
Oh,
there's
no,
other
it's much, I looked it up
options.
online.
Yeah, it's much,
It falls
so
into,
that.
It's very similar to
fraction.
this five thing.
it falls into the living will kind of extensiveness more, and you're probably right. I'm guessing the DNR, they jumped to this form to give a little more guidance. We basically, when we do presentations, talk about POLST. I'm familiar with the DNR term, DNR do not resuscitate versus this. Yes?
Is this specific to Washington?
No,
I don't think so,
no,
no.
when I looked it up,
Yeah.
every state, all the East Coast states had.
Yeah.
That would be the renaming to portable.
What's that now?
When they renamed it to portable,
Okay.
that's the whole thing.
Gotcha, okay, so that okay, thank you. So the gentleman said, the idea of the portability is that it is something you can take
And
with
some
you.
will say the
across
state,
different settings.
Colorado or.
Yeah,
Vermont
okay,
or whatever.
so that's good, and again, I don't know, obviously don't know the correct answer here, so make sure you clarify, check on that, yes.
How does this go as far as international travel? Do other people recognize this much?
This is a good question, because our son lives in Switzerland, and so, we're still kind of trying to figure that out, because he is married there, so his default power of attorney, of course, would be his wife. Switzerland having their own process on how that happens. He has our stateside power of attorney documents, so he acts for us. I think you're gonna have to look into some travel kind of situations then to see if they have some sort of international form designated for the countries you're visiting. Because I don't believe if he was in some sort of situation there, that they're gonna honor our power of attorney documents. Plus, they probably won't take it as it's an English form, it's not Swiss German. So that's a question that requires some more research. I would say you talk to a travel service, maybe AAA might have a good answer on that if you're a AAA member, because that has come up before. It's also come up even in traveling to other states and power of attorney documents and things like that. I don't have a good answer for that either. If you're visiting New York but not residing there, and you fall into some sort of illness or injury situation, your son or daughter's here with the state of Washington durable power of attorney forms. I would guess there's probably some emergency waiver condition where they have to kind of accept that state to state, but then I've heard that the rules are very different state to state, so I'm not positive on that either. So I apologize, I don't have that answer for you. So yeah, again, this is a good one to have. Once it goes into the system, you got it in there, and you're basically done with it, so. Thanks.
I was just gonna say real quick,
Yeah.
that, so, a lot of people, I think when they retire, sometimes live in 2 different states. So even though it's portable, I would suggest if you have primary care in both states to have it
Yes,
filled out and then put in the system. So, because here, for example, you're not necessarily going to see healthcare information in the Epic system.
yeah,
That is from Arizona.
absolutely, you're right. So what's scanned in here wouldn't be readable down there.
Yeah, it wouldn't be visible
Visible,
in
yeah.
an emergency situation in the hospital, so.
Yeah, we just got in the habit, with my in-laws, my uncle and my parents, of just keeping a folder when we were traveling out of the area as the designated powers of attorney, so we would always have that handy. I've heard other people have them scanned on their phones and things like that, so they could email them. Just kind of be mindful of, you kind of, once that role happens, you need to have the documents available. And even when you think about safe deposit boxes, they're great, but you can't access them after hours and you can't access them on the weekends or holidays. So, and believe me, if you've got it in the safe deposit box, when you're gonna need it is when the bank's not open. It's just inevitable, right? That's the way life works. So I wouldn't suggest you have it stored in a place you can't access. It needs to be somewhere 24 hours a day. You have that document available to you, right? Okay, so we mentioned briefly about hospice services, and the reason I bring this up, it really does dovetail, combine with end-of-life decision-making. For those of you who are on Medicare, hospice services are always covered under original Medicare Part B. Even if you're enrolled in a Medicare Advantage plan, this confuses a lot of people because I think 52% of people on Medicare are in an Advantage plan now. You still have the benefit, but it's part of your original Part B coverage. So if you were to look through your Advantage plan booklet, you won't find hospice care because original Medicare covers that. Palliative care can be covered by original Medicare or by your Medicare Advantage plan. So let's say what the two are: hospice care, end-of-life medical care that provides emotional and physical support for patients with terminal illnesses, reserved for those with a life expectancy of 6 months or less. Palliative care focuses on improving your well-being if you have a long-term serious illness. Palliative care offers a support system to you and your family so you continue to have a good quality of life. And like hospice care, those receiving this care can continue to undergo curative or lifelong treatment. So my mother-in-law was on and off hospice care for years, I think 3 years. So it's based on having a terminal diagnosis of 6 months. My experience with end-of-life predictions and things is much more art than science. So you can have family members that go on and off hospice routinely, and there's nothing wrong with that. It just basically gives you those additional support services and options where you have a dedicated nurse and team, like Multicare has home hospice, Franciscan does, there's other private ones out there, who are kind of guiding you through those terminal ill situations, and when you're past the point of treatment anymore. So for example, my father-in-law, he had a growing colon cancer late in his life, and he had already told us, you know, don't treat me, I don't want to go through cancer care treatment. So at some point he went on hospice care, which was great because when he went through the dying process, he did experience pain. And again, in my experience, some people do have a lot of breakthrough pain through that process, some don't. But it did allow them to administer morphine to him to keep him comfortable late in those years. And then they're the responder, hospice care is. So if he was at home or in assisted living or skilled nursing, they're the ones that are supposed to respond if there's an emergency, because again, ideally you would have a POLST order in place. So this is where sometimes care agencies, care facilities have different ideas and methods than hospice care does. So we had to make sure, like with my mom's end of life, that hospice care was advising the care facility because they wanted to keep her alive, that's their job. Whether they had to resuscitate her, artificially hydrate her, or whatever. They were more limited in what they could do with pain medication. Unfortunately, she didn't need it, but my dad did late in his life. So hospice care, basically think terminal illness. Palliative care could be someone with a long-term cancer that periodically has some flare-up episodes where they need new treatments. We all know people like this that have these chronic conditions of cancer. And it's designed to kind of improve their quality of life and keep them comfortable over a long period of time. But it doesn't stop their treatment. So you don't go on hospice care if you're actively being treated for a condition that's causing your death. You can be treated for other things that flare up, but not for the terminal illness, okay? My experience with hospice care was very useful, not only for me, but for my family members and understanding that end of life process. So I would always recommend you discuss with a doctor about that if you go into a situation with a chronic illness that your family member has, or a terminal illness. And again, more art than science. They might know, they might not, nothing wrong with that. Person goes on and on hospice. Next. And of course, the last will and testament, completely separate from everything we talked about. Everything we talked about has to do with a living person. Last will and testament actually is a will. It basically assigns someone to be your executor. You as the testator. Assigning someone to be your executor or what happens to your belongings, your estate after you die. You can often put burial plan instructions in there. Hopefully those have already been established. typically part of an estate plan, so wills really fall more into the financial planning world than the long-term care planning world, so I won't talk about them a lot. But again, make sure you know where it is. Make sure you know where it is. There's processes known as probate, there's small estate filings you can do if you don't have a will. Better to avoid a probate process. If you have a will, you file the will with the court, that's, you're taking care of the probate for the most part, unless it's challenged. If you don't have a will, it's the court you have to report out to who might have claims on assets. It can be very confusing, time consuming, expensive, especially if there's people claiming they had right to certain assets and things. Have the will in place, it takes care of a lot of those problems. Talk to an elder law attorney or your family attorney about setting up the will. Make sure you know where it is. Believe me, we have clients call us and say, well, you know, mom died. I know she has the will in the house somewhere. Can you help us come look for it? Like, no, we can't do that. So maybe it's there, maybe it's not. Who knows what she did with it, right? So anyway, keep that in mind. Part of the process, but after a person dies. Next.
I was just gonna mention real quick too, I think that, you know, something, if you're caring for someone who's, you know, actively having a lot of health issues, going in the hospital, lots of costs associated with that, that every single hospital in the United States has to have financial support sort of system in place that a patient could apply for. And it's not to the level of applying for like state assistance or Medicaid. It's actually the income level is much higher.
No asset test, I don't think so.
So, yeah, if you are helping, you know, a family member or whomever, and they're having large costs associated with hospitalizations, you would just go on to the website for that healthcare system and look at, there'll be a financial support section, or you could even call them, but legally, nationwide, they're all required to have that. And a lot of people don't know that. It can be, you know, a great stress on a family to have to, you know, pay all of those bills out.
Yeah, if you have any questions on Medicare benefits, I'm kind of a Medicare expert in the office. I can give you some information that's helpful. And Melissa's absolutely right. Hospital financial aid, and often it can extend to their hospital networks. If the primary care physician can cover those secondary copays as well. Front and back form, very easy to fill out, to send in some proof of income. Basically, they're not even looking at assets, just the income level. And yeah, it's very generous. People, even with some higher into the middle class income levels, could get a good chunk taken off, maybe as high as 50%. Some people on the lower end, it's full of many as 100% sometimes taken off in terms of the cost. So yeah, or you can call us, we'll pull them off the website and mail them out to you if you want. So happy to do that. And then I won't go extensively into these, but it's just some help for family caregivers. If you are one, self-care, knowing first aid, fundamentals of caregiving, respite care that we provide, relaxation techniques. We have a lot of good practical books and guides about caregiving. Happy to send those out to you if you request them, if you call us. Next. And then even more stress levels, managing those, thinking of your own healthcare needs, nurturing activities, seeking and accepting the support of others, especially in the dementia care process. It can be very taxing physically and mentally for someone going through that. We have a lot of good resource and support information through the Alzheimer's Association, where you can watch online webinars about how to handle that situation better. There's some support groups you can attend and things like that. So we really want you to think of us as a resource, not only for what we talked about today, but in general, any services, senior disabled, benefit programs, Medicare guidance, all those things. Thanks. And talk about supportive counseling, caregiver support group, trying to kind of change view on care and what it means. Having the documents in place really makes a huge difference, because it really feels at that point you're partnering with that person you're taking care of, or you're the partner with them as the decision maker, and you're really working towards an outcome that hopefully the best possible way as people get older, to make sure there's not a lot of financial confusion going on. We hear a lot about that from family members that are dealing with this tremendous amount of worry about their family member getting ill or suffering dementia or stroke, and then also trying to figure out all the financial situations. So the sooner you can do that, get the documents established, have some knowledge of what's going on there, the better off those situations will be when all you really want to do is care for that person and not have to worry about all this other stuff going on. So, next. Okay, so great resource page here. That's our number there at the top and our website at the Pierce County Aging and Disability Resource Center. If you're thinking of someone in a care facility that you're concerned about or considering that for a family member, our Pierce County Long-Term Care Ombudsman team is a professional group that supervises volunteers that have connections with basically every assisted living, every adult family home, every skilled nursing facility in Pierce County, and can give you some guidance on the quality of care in those facilities, how their staffing is, whether there's been any complaints, or if you have someone in a facility like that, you're worried about their care, we can help you with those situations as well. So care facility, call us at that number. The legal forms that I pulled and showed you, other than the 5 wishes, those are all on WashingtonLawHelp.org. There's a huge section on there for seniors where you can get these documents printed out, just like I printed them out today. You can periodically go back in there, see if anything's been updated. They have a lot of good information on different benefit programs and stuff like Medicaid programs, how to understand those, what the income qualifications are. Social Security has its own website. There is a 5 Wishes website as well that you can go on and look at some of the recommendations and things they have based on the document I showed you. Again, Social Security is your source if you need to be a protected payee. Lots of Medicare information at medicare.gov, also information on there about hospice and palliative care. Typically, a Medicare open enrollment for prescription Part D coverage and Medicare Advantage goes from October 15th to December 7th. I think we're doing a Medicare one. Is that part of our series?
Yes.
Medicare?
Yeah,
I think we are.
I think in September.
Right.
Open enrollment
Right.
period.
Yeah, so you'll see me again for that, so we can provide you some guidance there. And if you're confused about Medicare, you should be, because it's very confusing and complex. So don't feel bad about that. I always tell the story about my son, who's now a PhD research scientist in Switzerland. He spent a year as a Shiva volunteer, state health insurance benefits advisors, after he finished his master's degree in Bellingham while he was working in the lab. And he said that year experience was far more complex, confusing, challenging than all of his chemistry and biology classes combined. He said it was just so difficult to navigate and make sense of that Medicare system. So if he struggled with it, don't feel bad if you're struggling with it. Washington Long-Term Care Trust Act that we talked about, WACARE, is the payroll deduction on earned income starts this month. Benefit doesn't start for 3 years though. So if you need more information on that, let us know. But those of you who are working will see the payroll deduction happening this month. The Bar Association also has a senior citizens wills and trust panel, I think it's called. So other than the Dementia Legal Planning Project, we always encourage people to visit their website or call them. They typically have a group of attorneys that will set up the documents we talked about, durable power of attorney, living will, and simple last will and testament, just at a discounted rate of a couple $100. Or that Dementia Legal Planning Project, which I think is more geared toward the dementia kind of population. But since this is a new resource, I'm encouraging people to look into that and call them and see what they can offer you as well, so. Okay, any questions, final comments, anything anybody wants to share? Okay, well, thanks for sitting in, hope you learned some, oh, yes, Matt.
Is this long-term, Washington Long-Term Care Trust Act,
Yes.
what does that all include?
Right now, it's the working population that have earned income. They're paying into that starting July 1, and they'll have some limited access to the benefit in 3 years. Current retirees that are out of the workforce will not be tapping into that as it's currently designed. So only if you have earned income going forward from July 1 of this year.
Now, is there anybody that, how can I put this, with the long-term